all this talk about the Trump administration is pro-Russia, pro-Putin, this absolute idiotic nonsense passing for analysis. Let's not forget, even in the first Trump term, he was in Europe telling Germany and other countries, do not become reliant on Russian energy. It is a weakness. And they laughed at him, Kosha. They did not heed that advice at all. And here we are, where they are emboldening, enriching the Putin regime at a time when they're saying that we stand with Ukraine.
Great point. And so many of the things that Trump says, they age really well. When they come out of his mouth, people don't like them. He's a little bit coarse. He's a little bit rough around the edges. But they always age, and he always ends up being true. And that was something that was very prescient, as are many other things that he said. And on the flip side, a lot of these European leaders are not exactly sympathetic figures, certainly not Keir Starmer among the electorate, not Zelenskyy. A lot of people just don't like him personally in terms of his demeanor and the amount of travel he does, and he goes to awards shows and has rung the bell at the stock exchange.
For fashion magazines.
Yes, he is not a sympathetic figure, and on this side they're trying to paint Trump as a stooge of Russia, and that whole thing has lost its potency, so that's not going to work anymore.
No, I think it had a bit more credibility when they were running that entire Russian collusion hoax. Not credibility, that's the wrong word, but people were believing that hysteria. But since that's been completely debunked, it just sounds like desperation. And on Europe, here is some more sobering data. Again, Europeans, many of them feel that Ukraine should be getting more support. The polling shows that. You can see that there. But the polling also shows that they don't want that support to come for their country. As you can see there, even the countries with the highest percentage of people wanting greater support for Ukraine, Denmark there is at the top of the list. 66% think Ukraine deserves more support. But only 17% of Danes, Kosha, want Denmark to increase its support. It really just sums up this European virtue signalling where they talk a big game, but really even their own populations don't have the appetite for greater support. And this is on their doorstep. So I see how people think Americans should care more about this. We shouldn't have an America first approach in the United States when this conflict is in Europe and the Europeans seem to be a little bit apathetic about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a big reckoning for them because the flip side of them stepping up their spending on defense and maybe them providing the security guarantee is going to mean cutting back spending, austerity measures, these big lavish social safety nets that Europe has loved and had for half a century. There are meaningful repercussions from this for them to kind of recalibrate their approach to government as a whole. And the other thing about that is that's very useful is it gets to the crux of the point, which is, yes, we all support this war ending. We support Ukraine's right to sovereignty. We certainly support their soldiers and civilians who've been harmed and killed and injured and displaced. We support democracy. Everybody supports those things. But when the rubber hits the road, what does it mean in terms of prioritization? And you as a nation spending money and spending troops to do that, that's where things shift because we live in reality. We don't live in utopia, and that's what even the Danes see that and everybody sees it, but the leaders don't seem to want to acknowledge it.
Well, most people do see it, but sadly, the bulk of the media seems to be not living in reality. They're living in some fantasy world. Well, I don't know, some sort of Greta Thunberg approach to geopolitics where, you know, what you want to happen must happen regardless of the reality. And the reality is Ukraine is losing this war. America doesn't want to keep funding it. And either you surrender to Russia, which nobody wants, you keep fighting with backing of European countries and the US soldiers on the ground, which could spark World War III with a nuclear power. I don't think anybody wants that either. Or you negotiate a peace deal that's advantageous to Ukraine. And that's where we were before this meltdown in the Oval Office. And we've seen many pro-Ukraine foreign policy experts, those who have championed extra funding for Ukraine from the US, have admired Zelenskyy for many years, be appalled by his antics in the White House and what has followed. And among them is Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen, who has written a piece that saying Zelenskyy must mend the breach with Trump or resign. Kosher, he details Zelensky's conduct in that 50-minute press conference leading up to that clash. Everyone's seen the clash, but what led up to it, that 50 minutes, if you've watched the entire thing, it gives you a very different perspective. And he called President Zelensky's behaviour unnecessary and reckless, and questioned why he'd be so rude to Trump in front of the media. When Trump was offering him a really advantageous deal. He was getting a great deal of what he wanted. And there were even concessions made, quite late in proceedings.
When you've lost Mark Thiessen and Lindsey Graham, by the way, who's been on fire excoriating Zelensky, he was the most pro-war U.S. involvement senator that we have.
Yes.
That is a signal that he did misstep here, even though not everybody in international media and even U.S. media is seeing it that way. And this was a great piece by Mark Thiessen because he went through the entire 49 minutes, and 40 of those 49 minutes were actually Trump was very magnanimous, very cordial. And throughout that time, there are multiple points at which Zelenskyy was kind of goading him.
When you watch the whole thing, I've got to say, one of the more shocking things was how patient President Trump was. That's not his style. He let so much go to the keeper until at some point it was too much and he had to step in and check Zelenskyy. But there was a lot of disrespect, a lot of behaviour that Trump wouldn't normally tolerate up until that point.
Absolutely. And that point was when Zelenskyy said that, you know what, you will feel it too, because you have an ocean. That's why you don't feel it now. You will feel it too. And at that moment, you could see Trump's entire demeanor change, his face lit up. And he said, American people are watching this. You do not come here. You're in no position to say that.
Absolutely. And it was an astonishing comment to suggest that America is somehow should be fearful of a Russian invasion. Kirsha Gator, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.